As I was preparing my preview for the West Ham versus Crystal Palace game, I was completely thrown off track from the statement issued by the West Ham board to the fans on Wednesday evening, which was in response to the Fan Advisory Board's letter of no confidence that was sent to the West Ham board a couple of weeks back. It was a lengthy diatribe which had Karen Brady's fingerprints all over it. But what happens next will be interesting to see. Well, what happens next, I've already started to see how the fans are responding to it, as well as the mainstream media. Let's start with the facts. The club acknowledged that they had received correspondence, as it was called, from the Fan Advisory Board. And from that, a meeting was held last Thursday with the FAB and Karen Brady and various other representatives from the club. The minutes of that meeting were sent to the WHUISC, I think yesterday, Wednesday, and it was soon followed up by this message to the fans on the official West Ham website. Now, the minutes and this message follow similar lines, which kind of makes me think that there's not much hope of any progress to be made in the future. What was interesting with the club's message to the fans is that the correspondence they received wasn't described for what it is. No acknowledgement of the fact that they had received a letter of no confidence. The letter from the FAB was clear. The letter highlighted to the board a sustained failure, pointing to an aging, uncompetitive squad, poor recruitment, inadequate scouting, a derided training ground, and a London stadium experience that, in an independent survey, is the most criticised in the country. They also called out the broken promises from 2016 stadium move, lagging commercial revenues compared to smaller clubs in the Premier League, and a financial narrative that just doesn't add up. Highlighted the sale of Declan Rice and how could we possibly be in such financial decline. And then there was a demand for change, a professional full-time executive or executives with football and commercial expertise, no more board interference in player transactions and transfers, and a governance model fit for a modern Premier League team. So how did the club respond? They immediately went on the defensive with this lengthy diatribe, reminding us all of our recent successes, such as being in Europe for 3 seasons in a row and having lifted a trophy just 2 years ago. And from that, we went on to sign new players and that we continue to overhaul our scouting network and player recruitment departments. Now, none of this is really a lie. We did have 3 years in Europe, almost by default, more than by design. David Moyes came back to the club for the second time to save us from the drop. And by some miracle, we were then playing in Europe. There's no denying that we lifted a trophy for the first time in over 43 years. And there's also no denying that players have been recruited. An attempt was made to improve our scouting and player recruitment departments. All facts. But what was cleverly avoided was that despite all this, there wasn't a clear pathway for the success. And that has been proven by the fact that we've actually regressed since our European jaunts rather than progressed. Player transfers have been at the whim of the manager currently in charge, and also with the interference of David Sullivan and his preferred agent mates. A proper scouting and player recruitment strategy is never given a chance before any system is bedded in. It's discarded only for Sullivan to take over the reins yet again. Then the message went straight into the results and performance not being up to standards. Well, what exactly are those standards at West Ham? Do we aim to finish in the top half? Do we aim to finish in a European spot? Do we aim to win a trophy? Or as many fans would believe, is it the simple aim of just to survive in the Premier League and anything else is just a bonus? Now, my understanding is that the club plan for finishing something like 13th, 12th, 13th. That's how they budget. Anything below that means there's a hit on our income. Anything above that is a bonus. And the fact that a comment was made about the results not going well seems to be just a whiff of, hey, if we were winning, you lot wouldn't be moaning. The one area I think I would agree on is that there does seem to be a concerted effort to look at our academy under Mark Noble and to try and create a clear pathway from academy to senior team. However, when things are going tough, as it is right now, the first thing that's going to suffer and is suffering are academy players playing a bigger part in the senior team, as has been proven by the continued omission of Freddie Potts, who simply can't be any worse than either James Ward-Prowse or Andy Irving, can he? I don't mean that disrespectfully to those two players, but why is Freddie Potts not being given the pathway that's been created? And bringing in Carl McCauley, I think it was an astute move, but simply no acknowledgement of board interference with transfers and no acknowledgement of the fans wanting David Sullivan to step away from that side of the business. Now, there was a token acknowledgement of collective views of the perception of London Stadium. Perception or fact? Then the tokenistic actions taken, which barely scratch the surface of the issues that fans are experiencing. There's no mention whether they're going to look into addressing things like a standing area, a family zone, cracking down on P1 travel to try and stop them from selling home tickets on the open market to all and sundry. That's how we get away fans and neutral fans in the home end, which dilutes the home. We talk about the stadium atmosphere. Let's be honest, the more people who are in the home end not supporting West Ham, the more diluted the atmosphere is going to be. Now, I was interested to see that apparently they've invested tens of millions in the training infrastructure. I welcome the fact that they're inviting the FAB members to go and view these themselves. I want to see what they find out. Then the message went on to PSR. No one has ever disputed whether West Ham are spending money or not. They certainly are. But again, no acknowledgement of the lack of strategic direction for player recruitment. Imagine the amount of money the club could have saved if we had a clear vision of the types of players and the types of managers, for that matter, coming into the club. If there was a proper succession plan of, making sure that there's a continuity, we wouldn't have to spend so much money on players and then discarding them for next to nothing. And then the message to fans again finished off on the whole. We all want to finish higher in the league. We all want good cup runs and we all want to qualify for Europe. Again, the notion suggesting that if we were winning, you wouldn't be complaining. So overall, many fans would regard this message as more spin. For many fans, it felt like a brush off, a corporate holding statement that kind of sidestepped the substance of the letter of no confidence entirely. But so why does there continue to be this disconnect between fans and board? The FAB's letter was written in a crisis language. It was urgent, detailed, and uncompromising. The club's reply was cold, procedural, and non-committal. Fans wanted acknowledgement, accountability, and a roadmap. The board gave process and avoidance. That's why the gap feels so wide. They're speaking different languages because, as many West Ham fans have said many a time, the board aren't fans. They're transactional. They don't feel about West Ham the way fans do. The club message to fans felt emotionally detached. It's not coming from a fan's perspective. Yet again, it sounds like a business transaction. Plus, many will see this message as a massaging of Karen Brady's ego. Look at everything we've done for you. Why are you not grateful? Instead of cooling tensions, the statement is likely to have hardened positions, especially amongst moderate fans who might have been open to more dialogue. And it will be interesting, as I said, to see how mainstream media responds to this. A lot of mainstream media seem confused. They don't really know what to make of it. I don't think many are going to back it, although I will be surprised if that's the case. I think most journalists will see it for what it is. It'll be about the board trying to sidestep fan anger rather than pledging to make real change. Because above all else, there is no takeaway from this message. One of the things that was blatantly obvious is there is no real action plan, just promises of more dialogue, with which the board hope will just placate fans and bore them into apathy. Now, from what I understand, the club were initially going to ride this out and say nothing. So why have they changed their minds? What has triggered them to publish this response? I would say that they're actually quite worried with the marches and the protests coming up. And this message was meant to be a reminder to all of us just how good it's been and how ungrateful we are by deciding to protest and march. Now, imagine if the club had responded differently. Imagine, for example, if they, could acknowledge each point, the squad, the money spent, facilities, etc., without ramming down our throats the so-called successes. They could have committed to reviewing the governance model. They could have committed to setting up a three-way stadium working group with the FAB and the West Ham board and those who run the stadium, and let the FAB speak directly to those not through those running the stadium and not having to go through the West Ham board. Now that wouldn't solve everything overnight, but it would have shifted the mood from they're ignoring us to okay, maybe they're listening. And that makes a big difference. A softer, less business-like response might have landed differently across different supporter mindsets. For those willing to listen and engage in dialogue, maybe there'll be a different response, might be relief, that the club have acknowledged the specific issues and rather than hiding behind generic PR. For the realists, perhaps they might have welcomed a softer approach with a cautious but let's remain open-minded to see some concrete follow-through. But for those of the too little too late's attitude, they would still see the statement as a damage control rather than a genuine change. So where do we go from here? In the short term, I expect protests to continue. This message to the fans certainly isn't going to stop the marches on Saturday before the Crystal Palace game, nor will it stop the boycott planned for the Brentford game coming up. The FAB have already aligned with protest organisers, so we'll see marches before the Palace game, and we will see the boycott of the Brentford game. But behind the scenes, the FAB will await are now looking at the publication of the minutes, and then we'll be waiting for the next board meeting before deciding on what further action needs to be taken. But FAB are organised and are approaching this in a very professional manner. And I dare say they've already got contingencies in place if the club doesn't commit to an action plan. On the club side, I expect we will continue to see more controlled messaging, interviews that talk about long-term strategy and financial prudence. But unless they start addressing the actual grievances, the trust gap is going to be widened. And the mainstream media, well, they've now got the bit between their teeth. The media loves a fan versus board story, especially when it's this public. If results dip, the narrative will be West Ham in crisis, fans turn on board. If results improve, I'm hoping they would still run with protests rumble on despite upturn. The only way the board changes that narrative is by producing visible, measurable progress on the issues that the FAB have raised. And if they do it quickly enough and not dragging their feet instead of finding excuses, then that would be even better. This is a pivotal moment for West Ham United. The FAB has drawn a line in the sand. The board has so far stepped around it. The next 3 to 6 months will decide whether this is the start of a long-term fracture or the moment both sides find a way to be back on the table talking the same language. As fans, I guess the only thing we can continue to do is to keep holding them to account. And here on the West Ham Voice, I'll try and continue to cut through the spin and tell you what I think. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Do leave your comments, and I will see you all again soon. I'll be doing the preview of the West Ham Palace game probably later on Thursday or on Friday.